I feel rather daunted by the prospect of interviewing Stephen Hodder tonight because it's the first time I've had to interview someone who I saw wielding a Star Wars lightsaber just before the interview, but he tells me this was all in the line of RIBA business. Now, I'm going to talk to Stephen first of all a little bit about his own background before we move on to his new role here, but I'd like you to do some of the work for me. So at various points I'll be asking you for questions, and please don't feel shy, come forward. I'm assured that there will be plenty of questions, so I hope there will be. You're just a few days into the job. People describe it as a very intense role. Any regrets so far?
No regrets. I'm exhausted already. I need to take advice from Angela and predecessors how to manage my time, because the first Monday was you and yours, and then of course all the debate last week was about the walkie-talkie and all the sort of press work there. And then of course we embarked on 4 days of Sterling Prize judging, which concluded midnight on Saturday. So, and then Monday we had the Lithuanian Minister for Architecture and the Environment here, and the ambassador, because of course they've got the EU presidency. So it's been full on, you know, all week, and then getting ready for this, of course.
Absolutely. But, well, I think we got a sense from Angela of the kind of the whirlwind kind of activities that
But no regret. I mean, this is something that I wanted to do. Architecture has given me a quality of life, and I wanted to sort of make a contribution back, you know, and I've had tremendous support from the practice and Claire, my wife, and as Angela said earlier, all the staff here have been so supportive in this sort of run-in.
Well, let's hear a little bit about your early career, because you moved from Nottinghamshire to study architecture in Manchester. You know, why did you do that? I mean, some people say, what was it about architecture? Did it claim you, as some architects will say?
I was a very young 18-year-old, and I don't think any 18-year-old really understands why you embark upon a career path such as architecture, and certainly at that time, the reason why I enjoy architecture and the passion I have for architecture were not really evident to me when I was 18. Manchester was a really wonderful school at that time, and the buildings within the campus really inspired by Alto. It was really, you know, very, very exciting for me. I suppose anecdotally, when I was 11, and I wanted to be an architect from the age of 11, my parents commissioned a house, and I remembered the architect arriving in his Jaguar, and I thought, well, that's what I want to be. You know, I want that. I want that Jaguar. So I say the reasons why, and I was undeterred in all that period. My art teacher at school was very influential. She was very interested in the arts and crafts movement. I remember doing a drawing of Henry Hobson Richardson's house in Rhode Island. So she was a very early inspiration for me as well.
And so was it the arts and crafts movement itself that was a particular inspiration, or were there other buildings, other architects that you latched onto?
Not at that time. I think when I went to Manchester, as I said, there was a real sort of engagement with the Scandinavian architecture, Alto, and ironically, sort of Arne Jacobsen, where I ultimately was to end up sort of working for many years at St. Catherine's College. Jeff Worsley, who's here, was one of my tutors for the 5th and 6th year, and he was an incredible motivator and taught me self-belief. But it was probably when I was in 5th year that I, having had all of that background and being immersed in the sort of in the Scandinavian movement, that I then went to see the Sainsbury Centre at the University of East Anglia, and it was an architecture that I'd never seen before. The sort of remarkable, and the likes of the gallery I'd never seen before, where you engaged with the objects, and one end of the building sort of looked out onto the wood and reflected the green light back in, and then the other end was actually opened out onto the broads, and it really really restored my faith in contemporary architecture. That was a very, very important moment for me.
What was it like when you left university and decided you wanted to get into practice? How difficult was that?
1981. I don't think the country was sort of, by definition, not in recession, but things were really still
bad,
still
very
quite
high
yeah, it was
unemployment
still
and,
quite
yeah,
difficult.
yeah.
And I ended up, I sort of was very fortunate, and I working with a building design partnership for 2 years, and typically of me, I was sort of very determined to get through my Part 3s. I was very fortunate. BDP gave me some wonderful experience, but I sort of became, because of, I think probably people know me, I'm sort of quite a tenacious person, and because I sort of industriously went about my work to try and get that professional experience, BDP then sort of pigeonholed me, and I was sort of quite frustrated as a young architect because I just wanted to design buildings, and my father, I was very lucky that my father introduced a project to Building Design Partnership. And then to compound the frustration, I didn't get an opportunity to work on that project. And then from that same client, Building Design Partnership received a second commission. And I recall sort of speaking to my father and exclaiming about this. And actually the following day, I actually got a phone call from the client to say, would you like to work on this project? And I said, well, yes, of course I would. And he said, well, come and see me. And so I went to see the client, and he said, no, I'd like to give you the project. And it was a feasibility study, and it actually gave 6 months' work. And it was really difficult choice whether to actually go and introduce it to another practice or whether to start up on my own. And in the end, I approached a colleague in final year, and with 2 drawing boards and a golf ball typewriter, which shows you how long ago it was.
This was definitely the 80s, wasn't it? Yeah.
We started in practice, not really quite knowing what we were doing, frankly.
Well, I think you must have known what you were doing because early on you were very successful. You won the Royal Fine Art Commission Sunday Times Building of the Year Award. That was for Colne Swimming Pool, wasn't it? And then you went on to win, in fact, the inaugural RIBA Sterling Prize. So it must have had a big impact on your work to win these awards so early on.
I think starting so early in practice meant that I had no mentor. And so every project, there was an organic development. Every project was informed by the previous one. And so those early buildings inevitably informed a direction of the practice and still do. The concerns for how buildings are made, the concerns for how people experience buildings, consideration of a place, all of that evolved from those early buildings. But, I think as a practice, we are, first and foremost, it's about our clients. We give back to our clients an interpretation of their brief, and that, for us, is the most important aspect of our work. Secondly, I suppose, is the idea. We, as I said earlier, we tenaciously hang on to that idea, but we do it with a team. The team within Hodders and the teams that we work with, the delivery teams, are very important to what we've achieved in practice. And if prizes come along later, that's sort of incidental. That's not the starting point.
You decided to stay in Manchester, didn't you? Why was that?
I'm very fond of Manchester, and it's a changed city from when I first went there in the mid-70s. It has a wonderful intimacy, which I enjoy. It's possible as a practicing architect to actually engage with the decision makers very directly, and they've been very good to us. I love the scale of the city, and it's just that I could never imagine myself. I mean, although I had a practice very briefly and an office very briefly in London, I'm so fond of that city, and as I said, it's sort of wonderful intimacy.
You did have a few problems with one particular project in London. I think you talked about the 3 dreaded words, the Clissold Leisure Centre, which attracted a certain amount of negative publicity. Did you learn lessons from that experience?
You have to learn from an experience like that, I think it was quite unfortunate at the time. Interestingly enough, very recently, I sort of bumped into someone who said, "Oh, you were the architect for Clissold Leisure Centre," and wondering what the comment back was going to be, and he said, "It's wonderful." and Angela, you go there as well. It was a challenging project for all sorts of reasons, and inevitably there's always a sort of distillation in the press, but there were many reasons why there were problems with that project, and of course you learn. You learn to be, because I think the ambitions at the outset were too great, and you learn to sort of be more direct and more robust. The move to site was far too swift, and now I think as a practice we're very real in actually...
Was that the council ringing up? To challenge you. No, go on.
I think we're very real in explaining to a client what we think we can achieve. And also, back to this issue of collaboration, I think that we learned a great deal about a collaborative approach to design. But I'd be foolish, having had that experience, not to say that as a practice, we actually work in an entirely different way now because of the experience. So, it was. But I said this in the press at the time, on behalf of the whole of the team. It was an unfortunate, it was a sorry experience, but it was and I said that on behalf of the team.
I'm going to open this up to the floor in just a moment, but I wanted to ask you more generally now, what do you think the main challenges are facing architects, facing the people here in this room in 2013?
Someone once said it's the economy, stupid, and I still think I've made comments in the press about an evident polarization in the UK. The regional cities are still struggling, and actually we are beginning to see cranes on the skyline.
That's one of, on my program actually, we've looked at this. It's one of the economic indicators, isn't the crane index? Yeah.
So it is a sort of developing background, but inevitably that will continue to be the biggest challenge that architects face next year, and that's why Harry mentioned earlier about our 5-year vision for leading architecture, and objective 1 of that document is clients, and one of the projects that I've launched for the next 2 years is RIBA for clients, just looking at how we can actually, or the Institute can actually become a resource for clients. And I think it's very important that as a profession we listen to clients, but in turn, we've actually got a great deal to say about the value that we can actually bring to building. And in so doing, the RIBA is never going to be an institute that hands out projects to architects, but what we can do is actually change the environment in which we operate. So I'm hoping that the RIBA for clients over the next 2 years is really going to generate new opportunities, to soften the environment in which we've been working in the last 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's been a long old haul, hasn't it? Well, let's get there's plenty of food for thought there, I'm sure. Who would like to ask the first question? This is normally a tumbleweed moment. Am I going to have to pick on someone? No, thank you very much. If you'd like to tell us your name and where you're from as well.
Certainly. David Hampton, Chartered Environmentalist. The green question, please, Stephen. I don't want to jinx anyone by suggesting the greenest ever words would apply to anything, certainly not governments. Was Angela the greenest ever president? I think she was. I'd like to applaud her personally for that. But where are you on green issues? Do you see us as having a short time to go, or is it not an issue?
Question from the man in the green tie. So
of course it's an issue. I think that 2 of my predecessors, Jack Pringle and Sunam Prasad, really started the momentum as far as this institute is concerned in thinking about sustainability. Very early on in my sort of president-elect year, I addressed the Westminster Sustainability Forum. I think that this institute has a well-established agenda. The fact that I haven't mentioned it on my agenda doesn't mean that it's not there. It's the fact is that it's now embedded in the culture of this institute. I think that moving forward, all too often, I still think that we as an industry, we see it as some sort of bolt-on, and it concerns me, that somehow, it's something that we have to do to make it, more attractive to tenancies and so on. And I think that we've still got a long way to go to actually embed it, right at the heart of our culture. But I am sort of encouraged. We've got some very, very difficult targets to achieve over the next few years, and it'll be interesting to see whether or not we achieve it. But, back to 1996 and the centenary building, that building then it was embryonic, but nevertheless it had a real sort of consideration. So I'm always going to support it, and I'm always going to try, even though it may not be explicit with the agenda, it will always be there.
That's obviously going to be an important part of your agenda, and I think you've worked on that in your practice as well, haven't you? What about one of the areas that, this is just from me, obviously outside the profession, but there is still a perception that it's white, it's male, it's middle class. Obviously, Angela's done a lot to challenge that. That's something you'll be carrying on,
Absolutely.
presumably.
I mean, it's a difficult problem. Interestingly enough, in advance of coming here this evening, my wife Claire, we have a major project in Sheffield, and Claire was actually reviewing the pre-qualification documents, and of the 8 contractors that had submitted, of all the sort of organograms, they were all white male, And so the issue is an industry-wide issue, and I think that we haven't made great inroads into it. A lot more work can be done. You're absolutely right that in terms of certainly women in architecture, Angela and Ruth have done a huge amount, but there's so much more work to be done. We need more role models. David Adjaye, a huge role model for us. Very recently, and to try and sort of push it forward, Jane Duncan, who sadly couldn't be here tonight, but she's the outgoing Vice President for Practice, she became our Equality and Diversity Champion, really to sort of just elevate it in the agenda. So it's a challenge. We're not going to change those demographics overnight. But again, it's something that my practice has always been committed. It's enshrined actually in the Chartered Practice accreditation. And indeed, it's a requirement in the AJ 100 practices. That is one of the criteria. So we've just got to keep on working at it, And but as I say, I don't think it's so much it's an industry-wide problem that we have to address.
Lovely. Who'd like to ask the next question from the audience? Yes, thank you, the gentleman there.
Stephen, you mentioned teamwork, and thank you. You mentioned teamwork, and that seems to me to be at the core of the future. Do you think that patronage of architecture can change from where it is now, which is not particularly good, particularly when we look at housing, to where cooperative effort on the part of society can start to commission architects? And can architects get involved with that cooperative effort? I mean, we're told that the egotists who run the world, and it's increasingly volatile, are really not making a very good job, and there's a move towards cooperation as opposed to individualism. Do you think there's a future in that for the RIBA?
Thank you, Bob. I actually believe that a lot of young architects emerging from schools of architecture actually get it. That in a very, very complex profession and an increasingly complex industry, the only way we can actually sort of deliver buildings that work for clients and users is actually by way of cooperation and collaboration. It's something which even pre-Clissold, and it goes back to the building design partnership approach, it's something which is actually very at the core of what I do, and because we've worked together. So collaboration is and has always been for me the way in which we actually deliver good quality architecture. And I think that we have to recognize, and I've been qualified for 30 years now, and I've seen a big shift in our profession. What we have to recognize is that the architect is part of a team, and we have to work as a team. Dale Sinclair, wherever Dale is, who's we've been working quite closely of late, talks about the project team. That's the future, is actually thinking about the project team, engaging with people who also deliver buildings. What we've got to think about, I think, going forward, is how we actually then start to embed that into schools of architecture so that that sort of notion of team working is primed as young architects actually emerge out into practice. And as I said, into what is an increasingly complex industry.
Is there anything that you'd like to do with the Institute itself? There was a great quote which somebody dug out for me, which was from Richard Rogers back in 1969. He said of the RIBA, it's a closed authoritarian institution operated primarily for those in and running it. It should be a well-serviced centre for environmental studies where people meet and drink, smoke grass and talk. Tell me more.
We meet, drink.
Yes, I'm looking for a story.
I don't know whether we smoke grass. No, at the RIBA, yes, I think that when this building was conceived, you know, it's an institution. And I think that one has to go back to probably the presidency of Richard McCormack, when, you know, he opened the doors of this, you know, together with all the support of the staff here, opened the doors of this building and started to sort of think about promoting architecture to a wider public, and for this institute to be far more outward-facing. It's something that his predecessors have actually continued with, and their agendas is something that I am absolutely committed to. And as I said, I think with the support of all the staff here, it's something that we are very committed to actually promote architecture. And so this institute has had to change, it's had to develop, it's had to move on. And you know, it's something that I will continue to support.
And you're having the changes in the building itself, aren't you? So that'll make a big difference.
Yes, I mean, as you know, we have arguably one of the most important drawing and photographic and model collections in the world. The building is not environmentally controlled. So again, together with key members of staff, Andy Monroe and so on, we've been leading on a project downstairs which I think will be delivered by the end of this year, the first museum quality gallery in the building, so that we can actually have a revolving exhibition of our collections. Again, with a message of thinking about how we, you know, not just a stale, about thinking about how we can use our collections to promote the value of architecture and the importance to our lives. And there are bigger ambitions for the building as well, which we're just beginning to sort of think about.
Another question from the audience? Is there anybody? Yes, thank you. If you wait, I think there'll be a mic coming to you in a second. And if you just let us know where you're from.
Thank you. In relation to the teamwork and the architect taking part in the construction industry as a whole, over the last 10, 15 years or more, the position of the architect has been constantly eroded. Angela has done tremendous work in propagating the worth of the architects. However, the position of the architect reflected into its fees, which are lower on the scale of the main professions, and the meaning of the architect within the construction industry is kind of getting more and more diminished by the complicated process. What are your plans in the future of lifting up the name of the architect and its meaning for the economy of this country?
What do you think I can achieve in 2 years, Sina? I'm going to change the whole architectural world in 2 years.
Do you agree with the premise? Do you think the position of the architect is being eroded?
I don't entirely agree. I think, I know where the question stems from, because obviously, we saw the advent of the project manager and others, but I think to some degree, I'm sort of slightly self-critical when it comes to that sort of thing, because the way in which we actually it's not about elevation of role, it's about seeing the value of our role. When we actually start to talk, when we think about managing our client's resource, and that was part of the problem, I think, that we didn't, the caring for our clients' resource, their time and their money, that somehow I think that was one of the reasons why our role became eroded. And I think that, I think that we need to recognize that, and I think back to sort of priming that idea in schools of architecture. But I don't think, I think the role has changed. I don't think it's necessarily a less valuable role now. I think we have to sort of recognize our role as part of a team. And I think that we have to, as architects, we are general practitioners. Our role within teams is incredibly valuable. And interestingly enough, quite recently, before Christmas, we were interviewed, Claire and I were interviewed for a project at Lend-Lease, for a huge project. And the question came round about building information modeling. And Lend-Lease were very clear that as far as they were concerned, it was the architect, as from their point of view, that should hold the BIM model, because it was the architect that was actually able to actually engage with all the, the sort of delivery teams. And so I think thinking about how we manage the client's resource, that's the way to actually maintain a position. But I think that I think we have remarkable opportunities in front of us in our sort of coordinating role.
Because the image of architects did take a bit of a battering last week. You mentioned the walky, scorchy building, as I think they're dubbing it in the press. It sent a load of my colleagues down there to see if they could fry eggs on the pavement outside, and they claimed to have done it. It was a bit unfortunate, wasn't it? It gave the sense that architects don't really care about the environment in which they build.
No, I don't think it's the case. I mean, all architects are passionate about their environment. I mean, I think in the case of the walkie-talkie, I obviously I don't know the detail, but I think that we have available now all the tools to be able to model those conditions. We delivered a tall building in Manchester, and the sort of analysis and the modelling that we had to do in terms of sunlight and glare and so on, that was an absolutely essential part of that. And I think in the situation of the walkie-talkie, and we're now hearing that maybe there has been a similar problem before, and so maybe therefore it might have been sort of predicted, is that one of the issues I think that we have as a profession is that inevitably many of our architects are wanting to sort of develop and push the boundaries and innovate. But what we've got to somehow do, whilst not negating that spirit, is actually just to de-risk. And I think that whether or not I think this could have been predicted, it's such a sort of unique set of circumstances. I suspect it could have been predicted, frankly. But somehow this sort of notion that prototyping with buildings or innovating in buildings, we can't abate that. But somehow we've got to try and use all the technology and the modelling facilities that we have to sort of prevent that sort of thing from happening.
Well, we're beginning to run out of time, and I know you'll be keen to go to the reception, but let's take a question here. Thank you.
My name is Dorte Rik Jørgensen. I work for Atkins. I was curious about what you were talking about in terms of softening the environment. What you mean by that, and if you
About what? Sorry.
You said something. We need to soften the environment. That was what I heard. Maybe that's not what you said.
I think he was talking about the economy. Was that at the very outset when he was talking about the challenges for architects?
Right.
I think that was to try and make it easier for architects to operate when things are so bad in the economy.
Okay, because I was hoping you meant softening the working environment.
Well, he might mean that as well.
Well, I absolutely. I mean, what the issue you're talking about here is the context of an office environment, or
Generally, you know, like which ties in with the equality and diversity
Yeah,
agenda, the
yeah.
women architecture, you
Yeah.
know, how do we operate together, you know, in the working day, and what is it like for us to be part of the construction industry?
Well, we touched on that a little earlier, and as I said, I think we've got a huge amount of work to do in that regard. In my office, I should say Claire's office because I work for Claire. We have a very flexible arrangement, and we have to recognise that you know, and I think that it has to be a way forward, that we need to change the sort of culture, and I know historically the way that we architects and the patterns of our work can become entrenched, but that's not necessarily the case. We just have to be a lot more flexible when it comes down to thinking about our sort of working environment, and having sort of flexible ethical arrangements in practice.
And before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask you, what's your absolute favourite building and which one really makes you shudder?
I'm quite torn when it comes to my favourite building, because I remember as a young architect going to see Ronchamp, and it was sort of quite an emotional experience, sort of seeing the sort of roof sort of hovering over a belt of trees, and then parking in the car and sort of walking past the Pilgrim's house and seeing this remarkable building and its response to the context, and then immersing yourself in the interior, this incredible sort of gravity, this wonderful three-dimensional space and the quality of light. But I also, and this is quite true, that when I, in fifth year, there was a conservation exercise, and I was wrestling with it, and my then tutor referred me to a PhD thesis by Rod Hackney, who was the former president, and that drew my attention to St. Catherine's College, and I went there as a student, never thinking that in 1992 that I would end up winning a competition, and my client's James Bennett is here, which I'm delighted to see, and so in a way, the sort of strange irony that the building and the rigor of that building that I visited as a student, I've sort of continued to work with and added to with my client, and so I'm very torn between the two, because I have a passion for St. Catherine's that has evolved over sort of 20 years of working there. Buildings that make me shudder, and I said this in the press, I despair at out of town retail centres. I think we're working in Sheffield at the moment, and I look at the damage that Meadowhall has actually caused to the infrastructure in that city core, and the danger that might be compounded by HS2 because the terminal will be at Meadowhall, and so the damage that they do to our cities, which is the core of our civilization, really concerns me.
And finally, did you ever get that Jaguar?
I did once, but very briefly. I didn't enjoy it, so I sold it.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I'd like to wish you the very best of luck in all the kind of pleasures and clearly the challenges ahead, which we've had a flavour of. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.